Welcome, everybody. What a very well-disciplined audience we are here in the room because we're spread out around the room, which is perfect. So I always start off with a joke, and then it goes downhill, but it'll go uphill very quickly once we get to our colleagues to do some really exciting things. And it's a reflection on the difference between Dundee, Glasgow, and Edinburgh. It's about saying good morning to people. So here in Dundee, when I say good morning, people engage, they laugh, they go, oh, good morning back. In Edinburgh, they write it down. And in Glasgow, well, that's another story. But good morning, all. Good morning to those in the room. Good morning to those of you online. This is the first of our proper Discovery Day sessions. Yesterday we had the public stakeholder meeting of court, and I know some of you were here for that yesterday. We got really good engagement, a good discussion going about some of what we're trying to achieve here in the University of Dundee. But what the Discovery Day sessions allow us to do is to actually hear from those who are really achieving so much in our university. It's our new professors, and that means professors that have joined us. It also means colleagues who have been made up to become professors over the last year. So you hear from a range of our new professors giving insights on their work, specifically what they might be doing now, reflections on their subject areas. And these are really designed to both inform you, we hope excite you, stimulate some discussion and questions, and give you a sense of the range of issues that are being covered around our university. You'll also hear from a number of our leading educators, those who are, at the end of the day, helping demonstrate that we are at the cutting edge of teaching and learning. And you'll hear from award winners, and as well as being brilliant teachers and great at learning, they'll also excite you with some of the challenges and opportunities as we've come out of the pandemic and how we look at passing on knowledge, because at the end of the day, we're trying to create knowledge, pass that knowledge on, apply it, and change lives. And finally, you'll hear from some of our students. You'll hear from students who also are award winners, who themselves are communicating, who themselves are making so much change, applying what they're learning, adding to it, and demonstrating that it's the community that takes us forward in all of our areas of intensity, our research, our teaching, our learning, and our engagement and enterprise. So that's what you've got in store for you. We have 6 sessions, 4 today, 2 tomorrow. The last one tomorrow is the Stephen Fry Awards, and do come back for that. That's also very exciting. The format's pretty simple. It'll be brief introductions by the chair. It will change chairs so that you don't hear just one voice all the time. And then there'll be 15-minute presentations from each of the presenters. And what we'd like to do is do the presentations, and then I'll invite the presenters to come up and we'll have a bit of a panel for discussion. There'll be the opportunity to ask questions and enter into, I hope, a bit of energetic debate around some of the issues that are raised. And broadly speaking, we'll have about 15 minutes for these questions. When we get to questions, of course, in the time-honored way, please do raise your hand and I'll come to you, but wait to get the mic, because we're in a hybrid situation. We're online as well as here in the room, so obviously people online won't hear you asking your question until you get the microphone. So the microphone will be rushing towards you as we point to. And that's it, really. That's the nature of it, the format of it, the purpose. It is really the opportunity for all stakeholders, internal, external, wherever you may be online here in the room, to get engaged and to discuss some of the issues that colleagues are raising. So this morning we have 3 speakers. First of all, and I'll turn to him in a second, Jeff Blackford. Jeff joined us just this year. Jeff is our, are you still new, Jeff? I guess you're still relatively new, newish, the Dean of our new School of Humanities, Social Sciences and Law. And I'm sure Jeff will excite us and get us going. And then we've got Beth Hannah. Beth is an award-winning teacher, educator. And she's an educational psychologist by background, and she will really help us get into the mind of how modern pedagogy works and how the teaching and learning here at Dundee is just so excellent. And then finally in this morning's session, Yogesh Kulathu. Yogesh is another award winner, a professor, congratulations, but an award-winning, you're a chemist by background, Yogesh, is that right? Chemical engineer. So a chemical engineer who's now in life sciences and is really driving so much of our life science excellence. For those of you that were in the room yesterday, and I never tired of saying this, our life sciences is rated top for our research in the UK and has been for each of the last 2 7-year research assessment exercises. So for 14 years, our life sciences runs top. And because a lot of our life sciences, not just chemical engineers, but it's chemically based. And so we're looking forward to that very much. That's what's in store for you. I'll shut up. And without further ado, Jeff, over to you.
Good morning, everybody, and it's my great pleasure to be here today, and I've got the privileged position of leading the university's new School of Humanities, Social Sciences and Law. And the school was formed officially on the 1st of August. I started on the 22nd of August, and my first job is to thank everyone who's involved and all the members of the school in all the different roles for the work that went into preparing and some of the disruption to their work that happened through that restructure, and the general sense of collegiality and goodwill that exists in the school that was demonstrated yesterday in our first away day. To give people who are not in terms of the university some idea of what the new school consists of, this is the diagram and a list which shows ways of looking at the shape of the new school. And the list on the left is the very varied and wide range of disciplines that are included in the school. These are the subject areas. Now, I've got a list of 14. You could actually subdivide some of those, and you could amalgamate some of those. There's different ways of looking at it. But this list gives you the range and depth and the strengths of the new school. Those disciplines are arranged into 5 different divisions, and these divisions have arisen from 3 previous schools, which was social sciences, humanities, and education and social work. And what the diagram tries to show is how these are independent to some extent, the divisions, but there's also areas of overlap. The size of the ovals are approximately reflect the size of each division. So education and social work, which is education and society, which is the biggest division, and it overlaps with psychology, particularly in the area of educational psychology, which you're going to hear a bit more about later. And it overlaps with humanities, particularly around the area of languages, but in other areas as well. We've got overlaps between humanities and between energy and environment and society, and it's particularly in the area of politics and history, but that's not the only one. And a lot of overlap between EES and law. And again, there's one particular area which is a strength on that overlap, which is in energy, law and policy. Now, the constituent parts of the new school have been strong performers for the university for many years. They haven't all just suddenly arrived in this new school from nowhere. And with the university's mission being very much centred around social purpose, my main theme today is to illustrate how this school serves that university's social purpose mission. So part of the university's strategy, the main thrust of the university strategy is to have three strong themes of research, impacts and engagement and education, and they're all leading to social purpose. And the school is really a centre for a lot of that social purpose. And I'm going to illustrate some of that. I'm not going to cover everything. For colleagues who are here or watching online who see the recording it later, if I don't mention your area, please excuse me, but I have 11 and a half minutes left, and it's a long list. So the first, and in some ways the most obvious, is in terms of our education mission within the school. And we are very much engaged and have been in some cases for decades in the education and the development of what I would classify as being social professionals. Lawyers, teachers, social workers, community educators, early years practitioners, psychological practitioners of different types, environmental managers, energy analysts, for example. And the rate of production, if you like, of these professionals and their rate of engagement is such that we've been trying to add up how many people are working now in Scotland or in the UK. Most of them are probably still in Scotland, and it's somewhere around 12,000. It is an estimate. It's based on how many people have graduated, what the dropout rates are, etc. Those 12,000 people have themselves impacted on a lot of other people, because some of these people are now head teachers. They run their own legal practice, etc. So the impact of the component parts of the school in this area of social purpose is massive. But there's more, because we also have postgraduate programs in some of these same core social purpose areas. And this takes students who have, in many cases, worked in a particular field for a number of years and leads them into the next stage of their career. For example, into leadership roles in law, in the energy sector. We've got people working all around the world in high level positions, in many cases in government jobs or energy companies who are graduates. In education and social work, we've got PhD students who have gone on to work in prominent roles in international development and even for the UN. And a third aspect of our social purpose work within the school is what I would classify as transformational education, which is again core to the university's mission. We're particularly good at taking students who are within the first in family classification. So these are students whose parents or siblings did not go to university. They enroll on our courses, they excel on our courses, they get good degrees, and it broadens their career prospects massively. It's life transforming. And they're doing a very wide range of courses. For example, quite a lot studying languages, studying for combined degrees, studying for traditional humanities degrees. So there's a wide range of ways within the education and area of our operation that we hit that social purpose mission. Our research and impacts are also heavily embedded within social purpose. We have researchers doing great work in social problems, in social change and the impact of social change, in criminal justice, in human rights and in sustainability, both nationally and internationally. And the impacts of that research, which was noted with very good results from the last REF in many of our areas, and the impacts on local, national and international policy in a wide range of areas, including energy again, water generally in a very broad sense, health, policing, life transitions, pedagogy, children's rights and children's representation, social policy, mineral rights, and last but not least, a wide range of work on the impacts of climate change. And the illustration here is of an experiment looking at the tracing where glacial meltwater ends up. The school, now it's amalgamating those constituent parts, can and will make a major contribution to the university's research agenda. We now have critical mass in key areas, and we've moved from being smaller, fragmented research areas and academic areas into a large group. And in terms of student numbers, we are the largest school in the university. We have nearly a third of the university's students. And that scale means that we've got the ability to research across different disciplines with bigger gangs of people. A lot of good research is done by individuals, but some of the most groundbreaking research is done by clusters and by teams. So people are seeing each other on a regular basis, talking to each other. Sometimes it's interdisciplinary, sometimes it's within one subject area. And you can see this in my own field. The most effective areas in climate change, for example, are, for example, the University of East Anglia, where 20 plus years ago they formed a climate research unit, multidisciplinary, and really focus on that one thing. And the school structure gives us the ability to start looking for these areas. And what we're proposing is that we will do this under 3 broad, inclusive platforms, so that all of our researchers will be embedded within one of these platforms. One in sustainability, one in social research, and one in cultural research. These won't be standalone within our school. They will work much better, and if they're institutional platforms, they're across the whole university, engaging people from all the other schools as well. The model for this has been established through the existing Institute for Social Science Research, which exemplifies how to use, for example, pump priming money to enable interdisciplinary research to thrive. What we'll also try and do, as well as having those very inclusive multidisciplinary platforms, is to really focus on some shared research priorities that people from the different parts of the school and different parts of the university and external stakeholders can all engage with. Now, we've had a long and ongoing consultation process about this, which is still ongoing, but the direction of travel is towards a number of themes, including water, the cultural industries, narratives, both in terms of narrative research and narrative as a way of researching, youth and childhood, which is a strength across various different areas of the school, energy and climate, human development, and power and justice. But this is an ongoing process to really focus on what we can do and find a balance between including all of our researchers, making sure people feel valued, but also having something that's a really specific focus. Other benefits of the school that will come to fruition in the next 12 to 18 months are the provision for postgraduate support, which will come with the bulk and the scale. We have over 250 PhD students in the school, around 80 of them on professional doctorates. So this is again within this area of social professionals, and making sure that the people in those areas are skilled and educated to the highest level. We've got the opportunity to share teaching, both on existing modules, which could be made available across the school, but also look for some new modules or tweaked modules to make that more possible. So that the students might come in on a history degree and their main focus will be history, but at some points in their programme, they'll have the option of a wider range of modules, some of which can be focused on employability, some of which might be just a broader interest to them. And each part of our school can contribute to those within their specialities that have a wider interest and wider remit. Looking forward, on the longer term, what the new school will do is to really champion interdisciplinary research, but without losing the disciplinary identities that are important to colleagues, but also important to many of our incoming students. A more integrated education programme and process, so that students have the benefit of the wider school as much as possible. We've got a lot of outstanding colleagues and staff who work on, they're not on research contracts, their contracts are called teaching and scholarship. And scholarship is very widely defined. A lot of it has a big impact. And up till now, we've not been that good at collecting and crediting that. It's often done by one person in liaison with an external body, and we need to make more of that. We need to find out, first of all, what everyone's doing, and then make sure that we champion it on a wide scale. We would like to provide academic leadership for our areas. So, for example, we have a UNESCO Centre for Water Science, Policy and Law. It's been running for a long time, and it provides advice and research in the water area. It's a kind of area where actually Dundee is in some regards already, but could be more of a real academic lead in those areas. We'd like to make more of our civic connections. And again, some of this is already ongoing. We have a very strong area in community education, for example, whose work is almost entirely with external organisations, locally and regionally. But we can build on that. We can make more of that. And we can use the skills and expertise within the school to engage as much as possible with the city and the region. And then we would like to exert more international influence. And in the same way as at this university, life sciences and medicine have that international recognition, the new school has the critical mass and the size and the research power, if you like, to have more and more noted international influence. So I started off with a diagram of 5 ovals overlapping slightly and of different scales. And what we'd like to end up with, or this probably wouldn't even be the end point, a transitional point, would be something where the size and scale of some of those units have changed slightly. The overlaps are greater. There's still room for individual, for the divisions to be doing their own thing and disciplines to be doing their own thing, but the areas of overlaps are strengthened. And we would like to work very closely with the other schools within the university. I know they're not all on the diagram, and I'm not trying to exclude anybody, but the diagram is already getting a bit messy. Some of these links already exist, some of them can be grown, and some of them will be research and education related. And then the last stage would be to say, how do we externalise all of this to a wider non-academic community? Sorry, I did go on slightly too long. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Lots of exciting things happening, and hopefully we can pick up on some of them and your future plans for the school and how it can power some of these areas forward in discussion. Let's switch topics now to preparing for the complexity of professional practice. I mentioned Beth Hannah earlier in my introductory remarks. She's winner of the Chancellor's Award for Outstanding Teaching. And what Beth's going to talk to us about is how do we move from a situation of teaching students to preparing students for professional practice to really have impact. And it is one of the things that I think across the university we're very strong on, is that practice-based and practice-focused learning. So Beth, over to you.
Thank you, and I'm delighted to join you all this morning. It was rather strange when I was thinking about it. It's actually this month 20 years since I came to this university, and it was when I was preparing it and thinking about this. But it's not about me, it's about the approach to teaching and learning, which we've developed on the educational psychology programme, which is a master's level programme that I'm going to speak about. And it's exactly what Ian was talking about. It's how do we have a lot of professional programmes in the university, how do we prepare them for that complexity of professional practice? So start with a definition of what the approach that we have been using for 20 years now, nearly 20 or just over 20 years actually, is something called problem-based learning. And there are different terms that are used, like inquiry action learning, I know has been used on the social work programme, but that's the one that we are using. They're all different types of inquiry-based learning. So it's learning which results from the process of working towards the understanding of or resolution of a problem. So why do we use problem-based learning? There are a lot of reasons why it was developed, and I started in 2003, and they had started the kind of process of thinking about this, and actually grateful for colleagues in medical education. I can still remember when early on that we had someone from medical education came along, because this approach was as far as I understand, was developed within medical education. So we asked them to come along and help us to sort of develop this approach. It's not the sole approach that we use a kind of hybrid approach, I suppose, but it's a shift, you'll see, away from a kind of didactic approach to teaching. And one of the key aims was to prepare them for professional practice. So I just want to talk a wee bit about what are some of the key elements of problem-based learning. I think for us, a lot of postgraduate programmes, like say in social work and community education, we have students, or we call them trainees, who are coming with a wide range of backgrounds and experience. And so we want a shift towards a more what we'd call adult learning theory. So draw on their background, their experience, and encourage them to take responsibility for their own learning. And what we have, and I'll give you an example in a wee minute, of scenarios, problem scenarios, which are kind of based on real life. They're not actual real life scenarios, but they're based on their typical situations which they might encounter in their practice. And our students on the 2-year master's programme, both in year 1 and year 2, they spend quite a substantial amount of time in practice on placement. And it's to try and help them to prepare for that kind of complexities, the kind of messiness of real life situation. Another thing which it does, and it links to what Jeff was talking about, is it cuts across different disciplines. So we're drawing on theories and knowledge and research from different discipline areas. Very much it's about collaborative working. So what typically happens if we've got a group of 24 students, we would have 3 groups of 8. Although recently when we moved to, during the pandemic, when we're using online, so the groups were smaller. I'll talk about that in a wee minute. So what happens is that, and you'll go through the process, the students go through a kind of a structure, a process, and they learn individually, but also as a group, and they share their learning, and then they reapply that learning to a problem scenario. Another thing which is really important, and we encourage in each of the sessions, is that they should reflect on their learning. Think about what they've learned, but not also what they've learned, but how they've learned, that process. And I was involved in facilitating a group yesterday morning, and it was really interesting to hear their reflections on the process. I was mentioning the kind of problem scenarios, and these can range from being very well defined, a lot of detail, a lot of description of the situation, to quite ill-defined. The one that we were using yesterday, which was looking at optimal learning in the early years, simply had a question and a number of pictures. And so it allows the students to really kind of explore it, take responsibility for it. Also, you can use a range of different modes of presentation. So it might be simply a lot of text, or it could be a mixture of text and pictures, or it could be something like an audio or of a recording of an interview, or it can be a mixture of those. So quite a range of types of scenarios. And here's an example of a scenario, which is educational psychologists practice do quite a lot of training, work a lot in schools, as you're probably aware. And this is an example of, a made-up one obviously, of a head teacher writing to the educational psychologist for their school and inviting that educational psychologist to contribute towards the continuing professional development of staff in that school. So you've just got the email, and then you've got a sort of diagram there, a sort of prompt of a kind of process for continuing professional development. And that would be it. That would be it. That would be what they would be given. And what we do is, on the virtual learning environment, we would release that. They wouldn't see that scenario until actually the beginning of the session. What we use in terms of a structure is we follow the 8 tasks of problem-based learning. And typically you'll see that of these 8, the first 4 of those tasks would typically be covered in the first session. We would expect them to get to that point where they've identified what their learning goals are, what their tasks are, how they're wanting to divvy that amongst the group. So they would go through the problem, so that, like that example I just showed you there, they think about the terms, the concepts, any issues that it raises, a whole range of things there. They think about what do they already know, and obviously they're coming with that wide range of backgrounds and knowledge and experience, and they learn from each other. And that was something yesterday morning that the trainees commented on, that they had people. So we were talking about the early years. We had a couple of people in the group who had worked in the early years sector, so they could bring that knowledge to the situation. So what do they already know? What don't they know? And think about that. And then what they do is they think, okay, and through that process, by getting towards the end of the 2 hours of that first session, they've kind of clarified their thinking, what they would like to find out, and they've identified the tasks, and they sort of divvied that up amongst the group. Then what they do in the sort of, typically we would have 3 sessions. The first session and the third session would be facilitated by one of the members of the course team. And then the middle, the second session, is unfacilitated. And what they do in that session is they engage in that 5th task there, self-directed search for knowledge. So they can go off, they can do that in whatever way they want, they can come back together again. And then in the third session, which is facilitated, they come back, they share their learning with the rest of the group, they learn from each other, they think about how they might want to do that, and then they apply that knowledge to that problem scenario. They're not going to answer everything, but we hope that through that process, they have developed their thinking, their learning. And as well as that, you'll see in a minute that they have different tasks within the group as well, which we think helps develop transferable skills. And I was mentioning earlier about the reflection, that's very important. So as participants, we encourage them to take on roles as a chair, someone to kind of coordinate the group, and that's different from the role of the facilitator, someone who is a note taker, and they might or might not want someone to be a timekeeper. As well as thinking about the group targets, what they want to learn, they may have their own individual targets, maybe based on things to build on their prior knowledge, something that they don't know but would like to know, so that they might opt to do a particular task which helps them with their own learning. And I think that the other thing that's important, as well as their own learning, their responsibility for the whole group. So there's a lot of group process going on here. The other thing that we have on the programme is that trainees are asked to, over the 2 years, to rate themselves and provide evidence of core competencies. And so they can use the problem-based learning and what they've done within that process to evidence some of those core competencies. So in terms of the facilitator, I find, I don't know, it's maybe just me, we're all different, but I quite often just like to sit back and listen and kind of watch and see what's going on. And then every so often I'll chip in and say, well, have you thought about this? Or why did you think that? So these kind of probing questions, the kind of reflective kind of questions, watching the sort of dynamics of the group. You know yourself, if you're in a group situation, you might get someone who's very quiet, doesn't say anything, or you might get someone who's a wee bit dominant. So you kind of interject and maybe do things to try to address that. I didn't encountered that yesterday, but that might happen. So in terms of the benefits of problem-based learning on the programme, I mean, we get feedback from the trainees, but I've also had informal anecdotal feedback from colleagues. So these educational psychology trainees are going to go on to practice, and we've heard very positive comments from employers about the perceived benefits of using problem-based learning. And this was actually an evaluation which we did in 2021, just as an example, and that was when we were actually doing it online. So it's quite interesting from that point of view. And you can see at the end of the module, as well as the normal questions that we would ask, we also asked them to evaluate problem-based learning. And you can see there the range of skills that we would ask them to look at and to rate. And you can see there that the problem-based learning was rated very highly, 3.5 on a rating scale of 1 to 4, which is fantastic. I thought I would finish on some quotes here to give you a sort of feeling. And these, I would say, that was taken from that group, but they're quite typical, I would say, of the sort of feedback that we get. So the first one there, it allows you to discuss and work collaboratively with others, but also allows you to do some self-directed learning and then bring this back to the group. I find the PBL sessions extremely valuable. I haven't just deliberately chosen the nice ones, just to let you know here, but they were all very, very positive. It does feel like a safe space, the ability to present with peers, the sense of non-judgmental positive regard. And I would say that that's really important, that safe space, you know. And a few years ago, I was involved with a kind of interdisciplinary project with some colleagues in social work. And we developed a scenario which was applicable both to educational psychology trainees and social work trainees. And that was an opportunity because they're going to go on and work together, but it was an opportunity for them to get to know each other while they were still trainees and learn from each other. Unfortunately, that stopped, and it would be great if we could get something like that going again because they really, really valued it. Then there's one here about taking on roles such as a chair or timekeeper. These will have widespread use as a practicing EP. I find it helpful to practice these as a student. So that's the kind of transferable skills. And again, yesterday morning, one of them said that having that opportunity to be a chair and to take notes was really good, helpful in terms of practicing for what they're going to do in real life. And then the last one here, I think it reflects a lot of the challenges of working as an EP in a multi-agency capacity, role negotiation, etc. I value these sessions and feel I learn a lot from them. One thing I should have said at the outset, actually, we developed the use of problem-based learning back in 2002. And as far as I'm aware, I think we were the first programme in the UK to use that approach. I thought that might be useful to know. And I do remember being involved in delivering training and conferences and things like that to support other programmes in the UK to develop this approach. And I know a number of them are using that. And I think that's actually helpful to know in terms of a sense of leading on something as a university. So I'd like to thank you very much for listening to me ranting on, and I look forward to your questions. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Beth, and that leadership around problem-based learning and applying that to that transfer to practice really cannot be understated. It's so incredibly important to have our students come through graduation, go into a practice and make that difference. And the problem-based learning approach and all that you've talked about, Beth, really just helps them hit the ground running and really have impact. And it's impact that it's all about. Last presentation of this session is Yogesh Kulathu. Yogesh is going to give us a little bit more about impact, because as everyone knows that cells in the body talk to each other. But if I asked you all, well, some of you know how cells talk to each other, but many of you think, well, how do cells talk to each other? What's the language? What's the issue? And does that matter? What Yogesh has worked the brilliant work on is that cell signaling, that communication between cells in the body, understanding when that communication breaks down, what some of the challenges are, some of the disease progression, and really building and understanding language and mistakes in it. And if I've got that wrong, Yogesh, it's all right, because you can correct me. You can speak a different language. Yogesh, please welcome him.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you all for coming this morning. So what I'm going to do today is tell you, give you an overview of the research that goes on in my lab, where we try to understand how exactly information transfer occurs within the cells of our body. So proteins are very important to execute all the functions of our body. And this is under normal state. But also, as the cells of our body are constantly under stress. So for instance, if you've had a glass or several glasses of wine with dinner last night, then your body is repairing a lot of that damage, and your cells are very actively doing that at the moment. Your cells also face other insults like damaged DNA, but also pathogens. And all of these insults, the cell has to respond to it, and there need to be communication networks which transmit that information. And this is important so that the cells can then generate an appropriate response. And in order to be able to do all of this, the proteins must be able to perform their function at the right place and at the right location within the cell. So one of the ways by which this function is made possible for proteins is small chemical modifications, like, for instance, the attachment of a phosphate group can functionalize the protein that it does a particular function. Now, in contrast to these small chemical modifications, the modification that my lab is particularly interested in is the attachment of a protein itself onto other proteins. And this is a small protein called ubiquitin, which can be post-translationally attached onto other proteins. And what's very unique about this is that it's not just a single protein, but this protein can also form chains. And these chains are used to convey information. So if you look at the life of a protein, all of the genetic information is encoded in our DNA, which is then transcribed into RNA and translated into proteins. So these proteins have to fold into a particular three-dimensional shape so that it can perform its particular function. When that function is completed, these proteins frequently will have to be binned. You don't need them anymore, so the proteins have to have a way by which they are disposed of. And these ubiquitin chains that I told you about are the common tag or signal that's attached to proteins so that they can be then sent to the trash bin. Now, often in nature, what happens in all of our cells is when proteins are made, there could be errors for very many reasons. And this can lead to misfolding of these proteins that they do not acquire or adopt the correct shape. And when this happens, these misfolded proteins must also be targeted for destruction. And again, ubiquitin plays an important role there. Now, if these proteins are not disposed of in a timely manner, then these misfolded proteins can form toxic aggregates which are detrimental to our cells. And in fact, as we age, there is a decline in the capacity of our cells to be able to get rid of all of these damaged proteins or misfolded proteins. And this can lead to the accumulation of these aggregates, which are toxic to cells. And in fact, this is one of the underlying causes for age-related neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. So I told you that one of the most important functions of this ubiquitin is that it targets proteins for degradation or destruction. But ubiquitin also performs many other important functions in our cells. For instance, in communicating signals for cell signaling, it is involved in the repair of damage to our DNA. When cells need to multiply, again, ubiquitin has important functions there. So it pretty much regulates every single facet of our biology. And indeed, if there are mutations or defects in this communication network mediated by ubiquitin, it can lead to very many diseases, including cancer, inflammation, and neurodegeneration. So the question is, you've got one protein, ubiquitin, which is attached to other proteins. How is it that this one protein is able to convey so many different messages that can tell the protein at one point that it needs to be sent for destruction and at another point to do something completely different? And this is what we study in my lab. So the trick is that you need a language to communicate. And ubiquitin is the building block with which codes are built. And the way that ubiquitin does this is that this is a ubiquitin molecule, and it has several attachment points, in fact, 8 of them, through which 2 ubiquitin molecules can be attached to each other. So basically what you have is you can have ubiquitin molecules being linked to each other to form polymers, and you can have 8 different types of ubiquitin polymers. And these different polymers basically do different functions. And in addition to these 8 polymers, you can also have ubiquitins with mixed linkages, okay? So different types of chains, and they all convey different messages. So why is it important to understand this ubiquitin code and the language that is being built? So first of all, I said ubiquitin performs an important function of degrading proteins, and by studying this code, we can understand when is it that a protein is to be degraded and when it should have a signaling function. There's a very strong interest at the moment to develop strategies using this ubiquitin system to be able to degrade or to destroy mutant disease-causing proteins in our cells. So having a better understanding of the code will enable us to develop better strategies. Pathogens commonly hijack the ubiquitin system, and as I mentioned, mutations in the ubiquitin system also lead to many diseases. So understanding this code can help us to come up with strategies to deal with all of these. So in a very simple way, a code has 3 elements. You have a writer, which has to write this code. And I told you can have this code coming in many different flavors. Once this code is written, it has to be decoded. And that decoding is mediated by proteins with modules that can read the specific modification and then couple it to a particular or specific functional outcome. And since this ubiquitin does so many important things, it also has to be tightly regulated. And so once this message has performed its function, it's erased or removed by proteins called dubs. So in the 10 years that I've been running my lab here in Dundee, we've made some important contributions to defining the nature of this ubiquitin code. We've unraveled mechanisms by which the readers can basically tell the difference between all of these different ubiquitin messages that can be formed in a cell. We've also worked out principles that writers used to write these modifications. I'm very excited that we discovered 2 completely new families of dubs, which use unique mechanisms to regulate the entire process. And this is particularly exciting because these dubs are important regulators of the entire system and actually are promising drug targets, which is being pursued by many pharmaceutical companies at the moment. In the last few minutes that I have left, I'm going to tell you about an emerging story in my lab to give you a flavor of the kind of exact research we do. So this is a ubiquitin polymer that I told you about. But of late, people have started appreciating that there's a new kind of code which can be formed, which is a branched ubiquitin polymer. So this is basically you have, normally you would have a ubiquitin polymer built like this, but if one ubiquitin can serve as the acceptor site for two ubiquitins, you create these bifurcated architectures, okay? And this is, you can appreciate immediately looking at it that this branching can in fact work as a distinct signal. And proteomic studies estimated that about 10 to 20% of all ubiquitin chains in a cell exist as these branched bifurcated structures. So the question is, how does you have the same building block, it's just how it's linked basically results in a completely different message. And a problem that has limited study of these branched ubiquitin structures is that we have a lack of tools to be able to study them. So we started with a simple hypothesis saying that if we identify the readers and these eraser modules for these branch chains, and also develop tools to monitor them, then we can decipher the cellular function of these branch chains. And as a case study, we started with just one branched architecture, which is a ubiquitin linked via K48 and K63. Okay? So in order to identify readers, we used an approach where we could assemble these different ubiquitin polymers of defined topologies. And all we wanted to do was a very simple experiment to see what are the cellular proteins which bind to these this kind of unbranched structure compared to this branched structure. And I'm just showing you the results as we get it. But this, all I want you to look at is this is a heat map, and in yellow is what you have as high Z-scores or high binders, and blue is non-binders. And the only thing I want you to take from this particular slide is when you have these branched structures, you have specific binders here that do not bind to the unbranched types. And this was very exciting because it told us for the first time that you actually have specific readers to these branched architectures. Okay? So we found the readers, and the next thing we wanted to do was look at the eraser modules. And we have about 100 different erasers in human cells, which are broadly classified into 7 different families. And in order to be able to identify the erasers that work specifically on branches, we developed a neat approach, which is we labeled each ubiquitin within this polymer with a slightly different mass tag. Okay, so they're slightly heavier. Each ubiquitin has a different mass. And when it's acted upon by dubs, they're then cleaved into the final products, which is a single ubiquitin molecule. And when we analyze them by mass spectrometry, you get a unique signature depending on whether a dub has cleaved this ubiquitin or whether it's removed this branching ubiquitin. Okay. And again, we can analyze all of the human dubs using this approach. And we're very excited that we identified actually one enzyme called ataxin-3, which specifically debranches K48, K63 branched ubiquitin chains. So I'm excited about these results for 2 reasons. One is it shows us for the first time that there are specific readers, but also specific erasers to these branch structures, suggesting that they can be used to convey specific information. And the second thing is we noticed that all of these readers and erasers tend to bind to a protein complex called P97. What is P97? P97 is a large molecular machine which is involved in extracting and unfolding proteins and passing them on to the proteasome for degradation. So to find out if these branched chains are indeed signals for P97, we needed tools, and we used protein engineering approaches to develop very high specific and high affinity tools which could monitor the formation of these branched ubiquitin chains in cells. And using these tools, we were able to actually identify a role for branched ubiquitin chains for P97. So normally, if you had a K63 linked unbranched ubiquitin chain, this has a signaling function. And what we could show is that by the addition of a single branch to this ubiquitin structure, this now became a signal for this large molecular machine, which unfolds proteins and passes them on to the proteasome for degradation. I've been very excited that we've developed these tools and these discoveries, which now make it possible to study branched ubiquitin chains for the first time. And to finish, I told you that a key role of ubiquitin is to target proteins for destruction by the proteasome. And there are sometimes these aggregates which are formed which cannot be disposed of by the proteasome. What we've found now is that these branched ubiquitin structures can be formed on difficult to degrade proteins and complexes, and these branched ubiquitin chains are a signal for this unfolding machinery called P97, which can then unfold these proteins and then pass it on to the proteasome for that to be degraded. So with that, I'd like to finish and thank all of the people in my lab. I've been very lucky to have had a fantastic bunch of postdocs and PhD students all through my time here in Dundee who've been instrumental in all of the exciting research and the discoveries that we've made. I'd also like to thank all the facilities at the MRC Protein Phosphorylation and Ubiquitination Unit, my colleagues there, and I'd also like to thank all of my collaborators, past and present. Science is very collaborative, and without these collaborations, many of the research that we do could not be possible. And I'd also like to thank my funding bodies for their generous support. And thank you for your attention.
And thank you, Yogesh. So, three quite different and very exciting presentations. We've got 15 minutes. We've done remarkably well running to time for questions before we take a coffee break. So perhaps I can invite the three speakers to come and join me up here and invite questions. And I'd quite like to start in the room if I can. And then we've had a few questions in online, but who'd like to set the ball rolling? Very good.
Hi, this is actually a question for Yogesh. I really enjoyed your talk, and I was wondering if you could comment maybe on how universal the ubiquitin code is. So would a yeast cell or a plant cell interpret those branching chains for the same processes, or they could have elaborated all their own ways to interpret the code?
Yeah, that's a great question. So ubiquitin is very evolutionarily conserved and is used by most eukaryotes. With reference to the branched ubiquitin structures, we're not sure yet. We've only focused on humans. There is evidence that branched ubiquitin structures are also formed in yeast, but I expect that the way that this is used is probably different in yeast compared to man, and I think it's something that we should definitely explore.
Who's next? Mike.
Thanks. That was Marcus Lee, new professor in life sciences, who will be giving one of these next year. So I want to welcome him to this friendly community that we have.
Thank you for that, Mike, and welcome, Marcus.
A question for Jeff. Jeff, I was very impressed.
Mike, why don't you say who you are?
Oh, sorry, I'm Mike Ferguson from Life Sciences. Jeff, I was very impressed by what you described as the sort of graduate program, the generic graduate program in your school of all those different modules shared amongst the different disciplines within the school, and the sort of generic components forming a postgraduate training core. a lot of those subjects are actually as relevant to physical and life scientists, for example, as they are to people in arts and humanities and law and so on. I just wonder if is there a possibility of extending some of those modules further across the university, and maybe actually other disciplines should do the same thing and see whether we can't coordinate some of these generic postgraduate training courses. Thank you.
Thanks, Jess. Is my mic working?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm quite deaf, so I can't even tell if I'm talking. But yes, I think there would be a good opportunity to do that. And I know Blair has had a group working on some university-wide modules already, particularly one on sustainability. What I'd like to do is to see what we can, is to get things running, and there'll be opportunities for collaboration, as long as the modules don't get 1,000 students on or become completely unwieldy. But no, that would be really good to have that. It's quite difficult sometimes to squeeze things into the curriculum, though, as I'm sure you're aware, particularly some of the accredited courses, where there's an external body says you have to cover all of this stuff. It's quite difficult to squeeze more stuff in. So what we're thinking is actually that we might run something like 5 or 6, 10 or 15 credit modules, and students could combine 2 or 3 of them. So if there was then a wider range of schools contributing those smaller units, and students could take a couple of them to make up their credits, I think that would work really well.
Thanks so much. Nick Hopkins from Psychology. So I've got a question for you, Yogesh. And it may sound a very strange question and a silly one, but I thought I'd ask it in any case. When you were talking, you spoke about writers, readers, and erasers. So you're using all sorts of analogies or metaphors that help us apply our understanding from the everyday world onto something that is much more amorphous and abstract and complicated, which obviously is the way in which science progresses. We use all sorts of common sense reference to make these things concrete and to anchor our understanding of these processes. So I guess I wondered, are there other vocabularies that you could use to make sense of these processes? And would that widen the research agenda? I suppose in a sense, I wonder about the power of language and how we make sense of these processes, and what other vocabularies are available. Are there contestations within your discipline about how best to use those common sense references? I'd just be interested to hear about the process of labeling and the implications of labeling.
Yeah. That's a great question. I think language is very powerful, and the analogies that we draw from things which not only helps us communicate science, but also as scientists visualize a problem, if you will. And there are other languages like terms people commonly use, like feedback, communication, the wiring of circuits, and so on. And I think focusing on trying to improve that vocabulary might also improve the way we think about problems in science. I hope that answers your question to some extent.
So let's go online then for a quick question, and let me encourage those online. Please do ask questions. If you ask questions, they'll get to me, and I'll happily relay them to colleagues here. But Jeff, one for you, and it picks up on the points that you were making around social purpose, and actually also Beth, and the crossover to what you're doing around practice-based learning. And the question is around the extent to which the humanities embraces and understands that notion of social purpose. And I wonder if you could reflect, perhaps you first, Jeff, and then Beth, around do you think the humanities as a set of disciplines does engage in that impact-focused perspective of social justice? Could you point to some of the areas potentially in the school, in the university, or the disciplines where that works well, and perhaps reflect on how that social purpose agenda might help inform what we do in the future around our humanities work. Jeff.
Okay. So thank you. The first thing is the straight answer is yes. And a lot of the work done in humanities is focused on communities. We've got people who work on in theatre, for example, working with local theatres. We've got people working on storytelling as a way of engaging with local communities and engaging with early years education. And we've got a very strong theme across humanities that goes across into other disciplines, including dentistry, for example, in the area of comics, which is centered in humanities, and using comics as a way of engaging and communicating and causing social change. So, for example, there was a project looking at how homeless people or marginalized people could access free dentistry, and they produced a series of comics which were distributed, and it was very impactful. And one of the things I mentioned earlier was the students from underrepresented groups who come into humanities, particularly at Dundee. It seems to be a regional thing here. In England, where I'm from, a lot of humanities students are from slightly posh backgrounds, and they get into Jane Austen and they go to university, and that's what they want to do. It doesn't seem to be quite the same in Scotland. I think humanities tradition here is different, and I haven't got my head around it yet. But the students I've met don't fit that at all. It's a way for them to get ahead in ways. So I think humanities does a lot in that area. I would say that the question, and I didn't cover some of that in the slides, and I think our away day yesterday, we identified, and a lot of what we do is a bit under the radar, and I think our mission as a school in the next few months is to do a lot more self-publicity. So you'll be sick of us by Easter, actually.
I won't be. But Beth, did you want to reflect?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that not just in educational psychology, but in all the other sort of professional programs, social work, community education, etc., we would very much be in. The students would be thinking about their role, particularly if they're on practice and placement. They're constantly. So I would come at it from a sort of ethical perspective, really, or their underpinning principles and values, and we're constantly encouraging them to, certainly their own trainees, to reflect on what they're doing. So be thinking about aspects of injustice and working with different groups, and be constantly thinking about their own potential biases. So there's been a lot more, certainly with my own programme, focus on thinking about racism and you know, and all those kind of aspects. But I would think that would apply to all the kind of professional programs. It's about thinking you as an individual, how you're relating, interacting with other people, and the impact that you're having. That's what I would say would link to the kind of social justice aspect.
Excellent. And Yogesh, I guess from your area as well, I mean, one of the things that in the past I've worked on is an ESRC funded genomics forum, where it's pulled together humanities, arts, social sciences and life sciences to look at the value and the impact of genomics and engage with society. Is that something that you do around ubiquitization issues? I mean, you've done a great job in making a complex story understandable, but how does one then translate that? And it picks up with Mike's point, really, some of that interdisciplinarity across the schools, and translating this into business, translating this into practice, translating this into, you know, a better understanding.
So even if you take it at the level of research, my lab works with other labs which work on different disciplines and have different expertises. So then it does tend to become interdisciplinary. As the first question was about, whether it's also present in other species. Again, it goes into, people working on plants, exploring these communication networks using the tools that we've developed to study this in humans. So yes, definitely, I think there is massive opportunities and I think unexplored areas to look at how best we can synergize by working with different disciplines to improve the research that's being done, but also to translate the research to the benefit of the wider community.
Fantastic. Well, Jeff, there's another one for you for your OAD. Folks, we've got time for one last quick question. Anybody's got a burning one? Please, in front. I feel there's a bias to the left in this room.
Hi, Mahima Swami from the School of Life Sciences. I had a question for Dr. Beth Hannah. I was just wondering with this problem-based learning, which I think is a very interesting methodology. Over your years of experience, were there things that did not work that you found, in the process itself, which just you thought, okay, these are things that we should not be doing when we're trying to do problem-based learning?
So aspects that we shouldn't be covering.
Yeah, no, like that did not work. If you say, okay, well, we get people to be different positions in the group, or that worked well. But is there something that did not work over your years of experience, or is you found the process right from the beginning stayed pretty much the same and it's been working well?
I can think of one situation, and it was a situation where someone was kind of, I was talking about the group process, and it was someone that it was the very first problem-based learning situation, and the person who was kind of chairing the group really when I was talking about, you get sometimes people are very quiet, people that dominate, and this person was really quite dominant. And I mean, there was ongoing, obviously be careful with what I say, but ongoing issues with that particular trainee and working through that. But that was interesting in terms of how to manage that process. So I think it's not been so much the topic, it's occasionally you get these issues with the process where you have to and you might potentially have to speak to that person after the session, potentially. But I haven't found any particular topic that has been difficult. And that one that I was mentioning about the joint session with social work worked really well. And it was a really quite challenging scenario. I would say that one of the things in that was, and it would be as anyone obviously in teaching, you might be aware that something could be potentially trigger something. And I've certainly come across that in teaching where a particular session has triggered a strong emotional response in someone. So in that particular scenario,
sorry to interrupt you, but I guess that's very reflective of real life,
yes,
practice, and it's part and parcel of that problem-based learning and preparing for future practice.
Yeah.
Yeah,
sorry, I went on a wee bit.
Not at all. It's just we need to stick to time for the online elements, and also to give colleagues here an opportunity to have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, digest some of what we've heard. We're about to go to a half-hour coffee break, which will be just outside in the foyer. Please take the opportunity to talk to colleagues, ask for the questions that you might prefer to do more quietly. But in the meantime, please join me in thanking and congratulating our three speakers.